Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Rose Kitagawa, Chief Curator of Collections and Asian Art at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. She also serves as the museum's Director of Academic Programs. Kitagawa began work at the museum in 2010. Prior to coming to the U of O, she served as the Cunningham Assistant Curator of Japanese Art at the Arthur M. Sackler Museum at Harvard University. She has also worked at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and the Art Institute of Chicago. Kitagawa curated many exhibitions and gallery rotations at the Sackler and the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. She also has extensive experience researching, teaching, lecturing, and publishing on Japanese, Chinese, and Korean art. She has forthcoming research in a book titled Veiled in Shadow, Recent Discoveries and Technical Analyses of the Harvard Art Museum's Tale of Genji album. Rose, thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
We're delighted to catch you, although we're into your second year, but now you have even more to say about the collections, I think. Rose, you have a unique trajectory to this job. Could you talk a little bit about your family history and why you do what you do?
Sure. My father and mother, my father is Japanese, born and raised in Japan. My mother was born in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And they came together during World War II when my father had come to the United States in order to study in an Episcopal seminary in Berkeley. And the night that Pearl Harbor was bombed, he was put into jail, not internment camp, but real jail, the Alameda County Jail, where he learned some bad words and met some shady characters, and then was put in the sort of hardcore POW camp for the Japanese and Germans and Italians that they really thought were spies before being placed out into internment camp. So he was ordained in the hardcore camp and then ended up in Minidoka in Idaho, where he met my mother. And my mother was working for the U.S. government as a sociologist, doing statistical research, and she was Caucasian of Portuguese descent from the San Joaquin Valley, which ironically is the crucible from which the internment first came. And but she was obviously, she thought this was a human tragedy, and she was there doing government work in an effort to help people. And she ended up falling in love with the handsome young Episcopal minister who was there. And after World War II, they married first, and then she told her parents because she knew she would be disowned, and she was. And so they never had contact with her family again. Whereas my father was still in contact with his family. It was really a problem just with her parents. My mother's younger brother was very open-minded and became a political scientist specializing in Nepal and loved my father dearly, but I think it was just too much for the Portuguese Catholic family to take, that their daughter had married someone so unexpected.
Your name, the Rose piece of your name, is your mother's maiden name, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So you're carrying forward their tradition in many ways. Both were eminent scholars at the University of Chicago for a long time. And do you see the profession that you've chosen as a kind of a carrying on of that family legacy?
I hold them in much higher esteem than I hold myself, but it is undoubtedly true that because I had opportunities to travel to Asia and see things there, I sort of innately came to the understanding that, wow, this stuff is cool. And I think that especially going back and forth to Japan periodically when they were doing research trips, going to conferences and visiting with family, I had opportunities to see things that I probably wouldn't have seen under normal circumstances. My father was a professor of history of religions, and we spent a great deal of time at temples and shrines as well as museums. And I remember fondly how once we went to the Tokyo National Museum, and there was a special exhibition on a very important Japanese Buddhist cleric, a man named Kobo Daishi, posthumously, or Kukai, during his lifetime. And my father walked through the exhibition and just sort of shook his head that these were really important ritual objects associated with a venerable, important person, and yet the art historians who presented it really presented it as this is an excellent example of early 8th century blah-blah-blah. And, he sort of ruefully looked at it and said, yes, it is, but it also represents a culture and rituals and it would be great if people got together and kind of all the academic disciplines paid attention to what these things meant, as well as the decorations that are displayed on them. So I very carefully avoided being a specialist in Japanese Buddhist or Shinto artwork, precisely because I had no illusions that I could ever tread on the level of knowledge that my father had about that material. But I like to think that I at least approach the material with respect and want very badly to represent them in context and give a sense of the rituals behind these works of art. So I'm all about things, the material culture of a certain quality that is representative of the cultures that we represent now at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. And so whether it's a religious work of art or not, right now we have 19th century Japanese woodblock printed board games, and those as well are redolent of what was going on in the culture around them. And so that's, it's very exciting to be able to leap from specialty to specialty and culture to culture, learning enough to present the material well in a curricular environment here at the University of Oregon.
Well, what your father was really saying was that we need to take an interdisciplinary and kind of a cultural studies approach to these things and not treat them as decontextualized objects, right? Yeah. Right. Now, just one more question. I know that you studied Japanese language at Middlebury and Osaka, I think, but did you also speak Japanese at home? How does one say this delicately? I certainly learned all of the words that a precocious or naughty child would learn. They get down off there and put that down. And I certainly knew all the food words. Japanese went around in the background a lot of the time, but I didn't learn to speak it until I got to college. And I thought it would be easy. I was wrong. It's a very difficult language, but I think I had a little bit of an advantage in having heard it. I'm told that my pronunciation is very good, but that's a double-edged sword, because then if you speak well, then people assume that you are a native speaker and just blast ahead at full speed. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm not a native speaker of Japanese, never will be. But, for anyone who is an area specialist but not of the area that they specialize in, it gives you an interesting dual perspective that I hope I can fulfill. Yeah, you have the perspective of the heritage language learner. I do too, as the child of immigrants. So it does give you a somewhat distanced but also insider position on it. Now, Anne Rose, when you got here in the summer of 2010, the Eugene Weekly ran a piece about your hire at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, and they led with a question, why would she come here? She's been in Chicago, she's been in Boston, she's been at Harvard. What attracted this woman to this particular museum and this institution? What's your answer to that one?
Well, I think anybody who's set foot inside of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art has a very good idea why. The collections here are incredible and wide-ranging, and the legacy of our donor, Gertrude Bass-Warner, the founder of the museum, is just inspiring. It seems a very contemporary story, and yet she was light years before her time. She traveled to Asia in the early part of the 20th century. She lived there, fell in love with an American man in Shanghai, lived there for more than a decade, collected Chinese art as the Qing dynasty was falling, Japanese art after the Edo period had fallen, eventually came back to the United States, lived in San Francisco, and when her husband died, she relocated to Eugene because her son from a previous marriage was a professor of law here at the University of Oregon, and she entered into negotiations with the president of the university in order to, if she gave her collection, the university had to build a museum in order to house it. And it is because of her we have an art museum, and it is remarkable in that there are certainly many college and university art museums, but most of them are essentially a Western art museum with some Asian art. This is an academic Asian art museum built with the philanthropic goal of fostering cross-cultural interest in order to build world peace. That's remarkable, and anyone I know would buy into such a mission. The collections here are incredible. The community here, the academic community here, is so exciting. I've had the privilege of growing up at one great institution, the University of Chicago, went through the liberal arts model at Oberlin College, studied at Princeton, worked at Harvard. I've studied little bits in Japanese museums and other places, but There's an energy here and an openness, and I think it's kind of a relief to come to a place that when people think international, they don't automatically think Europe. That I think in the Northwest, perhaps people unconsciously, just because we're on the Pacific, don't assume that when we talk about overseas that they're talking about the European tradition. And that's music to my ears, because any Asian art historian who's worked in an encyclopedic museum kind of knows that the rules are, that's great, you do your Asian thing, just sort of stay in the corner and leave the heavy lifting to the people who do Picasso. And it's refreshing and amazing to be charged with moving ahead with the greater mission of this museum as an Asianist. I have the privilege of working with wonderful colleagues, and it's between the collection, the curriculum, we have incredible students, and I love mentoring. It's surprising, but even some of the great Ivy League institutions don't provide as many opportunities for students to engage with the museum. And so we have, at any given time, 40 students, undergraduate and graduate students, functioning either as employees, interns, practicum students, volunteers, not just in curatorial, but in development, in exhibition prep, in collections management, administration. And I think that really gives them a leg up if they want to go on in museum careers. They have experience here, and it's a great pleasure to work with such young, energetic people and kind of see through their eyes. It just constantly refreshes your screen. It's great.
And that's a good metaphor, and we'll actually get back to your use of digital tools in helping exploit and explain the collections. But I wanted, before we talk about how you're dealing with the Asian collections at the Jordan Schnitzer, to ask you a little bit about your own research. You have really fabulous research going. You've published in Apollo magazine. You have another piece forthcoming on a really extraordinary manuscript at Harvard that is based on the Tale of Genji.
Yes.
Could you explain just a little bit about the significance of that book and what you're doing with it?
So to give a tiny bit of background, the Tale of Genji is a very important monument of Japanese literature, probably the single most influential work of Japanese literature, written in the early 11th century by a woman we now know as Murasaki Shikibu, which is actually the combined name of one of the characters in the tale with the highest rank that the author's father ever attained in court. So a relatively mysterious woman about whom we know something, but not enough. She was in the court, in the imperial court in Kyoto in the early part of the 11th century, and started writing a tale that became kind of the most exciting soap opera for everyone of the day. And of course, originally it was passed around in manuscript form. A century later, in the 12th century, there still exists today fragments of an amazing hand scroll, so a horizontal hand scroll that combines texts and images representing the 54 chapters of the Tale of Genji. But of course, that's fragmentary. It doesn't represent all 54 chapters, but it's incredibly nuanced, and it's just redolent of sort of the perfume of the aristocracy at the end of the Heian period, which ends in 1185. And sort of the decline of the courtly aristocrats just at the time when warriors end up taking over. So that tale becomes kind of a trope that plays out in later Japanese history. And Harvard is very privileged to have the earliest extant complete album leaf format manuscript of the Tale of Genji. So it does not date from the 12th century. The national treasures in Japan date from the 12th century, those fragmentary hand scrolls that I mentioned. But Harvard's piece is in a vertical format. It's each an individual page, just about that large, with a picture that is synopsizing something very important about each chapter, and likewise a page of something called a kotobagaki, or a calligraphic sheet, on which there is a suggestive inscription. The tale is very long. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to get the entire text of the chapter on one of those sheets, but the pairing of text and imagery and the interplay between them is fascinating. And it also happens to come from the period of time in which they start making essentially Cliff's Notes for artists, because artists don't have time to sit down and read the entire Tale of Genji. That's a very literate pursuit. and there aren't even copies for artists to read. So they get a kind of Cliff's Note version saying, if you need to depict chapter 1, you want to show this, the rituals when Genji is being evaluated by a soothsayer. And so that manual, that Tale of Genji manual, comes from exactly the same time that Harvard's album does. And interestingly, Harvard's album came in an album format, so it's an accordion fold album in which these things were pasted to one another. But by looking carefully at them, we actually can see that they have interesting discolorations on the surfaces of some of the calligraphic sheets. There's a particular pigment, red lead, that changes over time. And so there seems to have been a chemical reaction where paintings came in contact with calligraphic texts. And on the basis of that and absolute obsession and CSI-like research, it was possible to figure out that they had in fact originally been on a pair of folding screens. And again, it comes about at a time that we wonder why things go from a smaller, intimate format that courtiers would have consumed to a sort of broader format that would have been seen in a group. And once we did a conservation project on those album leaves, on the reverse, there were inscriptions that suggested who the calligraphies had been written by, each the head of a major school of calligraphy at the early part of the 16th century, who commissioned the entire project, the temple to which they were given, and a date, and also the insinuation that they may have been in a screen format, as well as the chapter name and number from the Tale of Genji. And so it became an even broader tale that other colleagues have written about how the broadening of the Tale of Genji, it goes from being the exclusive purview of the court to something that is shared by higher-ranking people in Japan, those who aspire to take on the heirs of the court, the literary heirs of the court. And so that album becomes very, very important, as well as being very beautiful. And it was a wonderful work of art. And someday in the future, we hope very much to borrow it so we can do a Genji exhibition here, which I think would be exciting for all of our students.
Your project, your work on that Tale of Genji artifact obviously touches on major issues of how to curate, how to conserve items like that. Here at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, I know you're working on 2 grant-based projects to conserve 4 Japanese hanging scrolls and a Korean folding screen.
Right.
Can you talk about those objects?
Sure. The Japanese hanging scrolls, we got a grant from the Sumitomo Foundation. It's a grant-giving organization that supports the conservation of any type of art. And given the curricular needs here at the University of Oregon, we have a very active art history program. And so the Japanese art historian would love to be able to present, for example, some early Buddhist material, but unfortunately our paintings were in such terrible disarray. So having gotten a Sumitomo grant previously at Harvard, when I got here, I thought, well, we could apply for a Sumitomo grant and get those pieces conserved, and then we could use them for teaching. Because scrolls are a very dynamic format, and when they're healthy, it's no problem rolling and unrolling them. But when they're unhealthy, every time you roll and unroll them, little bits of pigment and even the ground can flake off, and of course they do themselves a great deal of damage. So we got grant funding for that, and in fact they're being conserved by a Japanese conservator who's based in California. So hopefully next year we'll have those back and they will come back into circulation in our galleries. The Korean project is also very exciting. The Korean National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage has funded a project to conserve our 10 Symbols of Longevity screen, which is widely thought to be the finest example of its type. It is a 19th century 10-panel folding screen in ink and color on fabric that 8 panels of it show the 10 symbols of longevity, which, let's see, from memory, pine and bamboo, cranes, turtles, deer, auspicious fungus, water, the moon, and clouds. I don't know if that's 10.
9.
That's 9. Can't remember the last one.
We won't hold you to it.
Right.
That's pretty good.
But the last 2 panels are very strange. They are plain fabric with lengthy inscriptions, and the inscriptions name 14 people who are members of the Korean imperial court around 1880, and 7 of the 14 are members of the imperial pharmacy. You might ask, why would people from the Imperial Pharmacy be inscribing such a screen? And in fact, a great deal of scholarship has happened in Korea to suggest that not just this painting, but 2 other paintings were done in celebration of a Korean prince who miraculously survived smallpox. And so they had a celebration in 1880 in which these 3 screens would have been shown together. Ours, which is the prettiest, shows the 10 symbols of longevity. The other 2 show court rituals in Korea. And now that the conservation project is taking place, we entered discussions with the Korean National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage to display our painting in Seoul, to which I replied, of course, we would love to do that, but we want to show all 3 together. And then we'd like to bring all 3 together here to Eugene and have an international symposium on Korean art and conservation. And so that is the plan. So we think at the end of 2012, perhaps in November or December, there will be a special exhibition at the Palace Museum in Seoul with all 3 scrolls, with a bilingual publication that we will then bring here along with the other 2 paintings as we return our painting rightfully to our Korean galleries and have this event. So it's kind of my favorite things in the world getting tied together, the study of Asian art and especially technical conservation and technical studies of original objects. So it's a great privilege to be able to work on such a project.
You are using digital tools to help explicate and make the discovery of some of the objects in the museum. Can you talk about how you're using iPads and so on?
Last year we had a special exhibition about 18th century views of Rome associated with Giuseppe Vassi. And it was a show not just about maps and mapping and books, sort of tour guides, but of course it touched on larger issues of the Grand Tour. And the Europeans and the Americans of a certain means that were able to travel around and the way that Vassi, the artist, guided them. As part of that exhibition, we realized it would be very useful to have the technical ability to show multiple different views of the same place. And for that, we acquired a number of iPads that we have subsequently reused in different iterations throughout our galleries. So at this moment, we have a special exhibition up of Joe Sacco's work in Garajda, affiliated with a project that the Eugene Symphony is doing having to do with war and peace. And I believe that the Humanities Center is doing having to do with conflict. Those original drawings from which the Garajda book, Safe Zone, was published are on view in our Gilkey Study Center, along with a wonderful iPad app which the museum has programmed in such a way that you touch what looks like a panel of artwork, and each panel is in fact its own button. And you can move through the biography of the artist, background on Garajda, what was going on in different places, and perhaps most touchingly, Joe Sacco developed long-term friendly relations with some of his translators and guides. And there's a wonderful thing called Riki, R-I-K-I, at the bottom, which is his guide Riki, who sent him a video cassette of Garajda 5 years after the conflict, which is backgrounded by Riki playing the guitar and playing Hotel California. So as you're in the room, you're surrounded not just by the artwork that Joe did reflecting the conflict, but the voice of somebody who lived through it and the images of it as it exists. And so in all of our iterations of technology in the galleries, we try and add value rather than distract people from the works of art. Sometimes there is the tendency for the digital technology to be so intoxicating that people turn their backs on the works of art, but we hope that what we do with technology in the galleries will make people look more closely and more carefully at the works of art around them.
I should remind viewers that we did a great interview with the curators of the Vassi show on this program, and that's archived so people can go back and look at that. We spoke with Jim Tice and James Harper, who put that show together as well. So yes, I think the museum is really exemplary in its use of that kind of digital technology. Also, I really am excited about the effort to sign all of the exhibits in more than one language. And I know you are making sure that the appropriate Asian language goes with your Asian expositions, right?
We are trying. It's something of an effort because, of course, it adds more information at the front end. but it's certainly worth the effort. And I think that it's great for our students who study those languages, and it's an incredibly welcoming gesture to people whose native language is not English to see that, oh, they actually expected me. And so we hope to introduce more languages in all of our galleries, but it's hard to get it up and running, so bit by bit.
And Rose, we only have a couple of minutes left. Can you talk about a show upcoming that you're particularly excited about?
We have a lot of exciting shows coming up. Actually, currently we have an exhibition that we need to deinstall in one space and move upstairs. It's a show about Sugoroku, which is the Japanese woodblock printed board game. It was curated by a graduate student, Faith Kresge, who's working with me as a Laurel intern. It's based on her original research on one of our prints, and the theme is monsters. So what she did was she translated all of the inscriptions on this Chutes and Ladders board game, and we blew it up to double the size of a Twister game, and you can roll digital dice on an iPad and use your body as the playing piece to move through the game and learn more about Japanese monsters. Likewise, we have upcoming special exhibitions of the University of Oregon's art faculty. We'll have amazing onslaught of Asian exhibitions in the spring. Visions of the Orient, about 4 Western female artists, 3 of whom were close personal friends of our museum's founder, Gertrude Bass-Warner, and their views of Asia, sort of Orientalist views of Asia through a feminine lens. A special exhibition of the Singaporean photographer Russell Wong, who's a graduate of the University of Oregon and now very famous for celebrity portraits and landscapes, and a lot of other exhibitions. So we hope people will come and visit the galleries often. Things are constantly changing, and we hope you'll be excited by what you see there.
There's a lot to see. I work right across the quad, and I try to get there as often as I can.
Oh, good.
Thank you for talking to us. It's
That's
delightful to hear more about it. We've been speaking with Rose Kitagawa, Chief Curator of Collections and Asian Art at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. She also serves as the museum's Director of the Academic Programs. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.